My name is Tom Gusky. I'm on the faculty in our Department of Educational School and Counseling Psychology. And I'm here to describe to you today some work on grading. I've always been interested in the topic of grading, and my interest began in my very first year of teaching. I began in education as a middle school teacher. I taught grades 6, 7, and 8. And it was the policy in our school to administer final examinations to all of our 8th grade students. This was done to prepare them for what they were going to face in high school. And I remember the very first time I did this, I was standing outside of my classroom door greeting my students as they came in. And one of my students was a really, really bright and hardworking young woman by the name of Jessica. And as Jessica passed me coming into the room, I said, "Hi, Jess, how are you today?" And she said, "Fine, thank you." I said, "Did you study for your exam?" And she said, "No, not really." I was shocked. And I turned to her and I said, "Jess, I don't understand. This is a really important part of your grade. How could you not study for your exam?" And she looked at me really quizzically and she said, "Well, Mr. Gusky, I worked this out. I only need a 51% for my A. I don't have to study for 51%. And what Jessica taught me on that day is that success in school for her and probably for most of her classmates had nothing to do with learning. It had nothing to do with developing new understandings. It had nothing to do with being able to do things you weren't able to do before. For her, success was all about getting good grades. And it changed my perspective on this. This very bright and clever 14-year-old had figured out the system. And she knew what she needed to do to get her A. And she was surprised that I didn't get it. Totally surprised me. You see, grades serve a variety of different purposes in school. I mean, grades communicate to parents how other kids have done, and they communicate to students the kind of things that we expect them to learn. They provide a basis for promoting kids from one grade level to the next and deciding who gets into honors classes and who gets into college universities. We use grades to evaluate the quality of educational programs. They provide incentives in some ways for students. And in some cases, we use grades to recognize effort, responsibility, or to ensure students' compliance with our classroom rules. The problem is, we don't all agree on what is the most important purpose. And because we don't agree on that, there's wide variation among teachers in terms of the purpose they set for grades and the policies that they establish. Even among teachers who teach in the same school, in the same department, teaching the same classes. There's this tremendously wide variation. And because of that lack of consistency and the lack of clarity, students see grading as a huge game. And they become strategists in the game. The really good ones become expert strategists. They have figured out the system and what they need to do to get a grade. And those who make it to us at the university level tend to be among the very best strategists the game has ever known. Right? The problem is that for a lot of students, the game doesn't make sense. And these inconsistencies among teachers from class to class just baffle them with regard to grading. And so when their parent turns to them and asks them the night before the report card comes out, "What grade are you going to get in this class?" they respond, in all honesty, "I don't know." You see, if it's supposed to be a communication device, it's just not serving that purpose very well at all. See, when we want to improve grading, the first thing we have to do is be clear about our purpose. And when you decide the purpose for a grade, it really comes down to what we mean by the grade. And in deciding that purpose, you have one of two non-overlapping alternatives. Is your purpose to select talent, or is it to develop talent? It's one of the two, and there's no room in between. Now see, if your purpose is to select talent, then what you have to do is you have to maximize the differences between students. You have to spread them out. Because if students are clustered together on any measure of their achievement, it's very difficult to make that distinction. And traditional grading practices do that pretty well. Grading on the curve, for example. We rank students according to some arbitrary criteria. We assign high grades to the top-ranked students, low grades to the bottom-ranked students. The problem is the grade tells you nothing about whether students have learned or not. The grade doesn't reflect if students have excelled. It doesn't reflect if they've really mastered a curriculum. The grade simply means you outdid your classmates. Instructionally, the very best way to maximize differences between students is to teach poorly. Nothing does it better. Because if you teach poorly, there are students who are going to learn regardless of what we do. And the vast majority of kids who need our help and direction won't get it, and we'll spread them out. But if your purpose is to develop talent, then you operate under very different rules. Actually, you do exactly the opposite. That what you have to do is not maximize the difference between students, you want to make it smaller. You want to reduce it. You want all of your students to learn well. And in order to do that, there are two steps you have to follow. The first is you have to really articulate your curriculum. You see, learning in any subject area is infinite, but a curriculum is finite. And we have to specify that curriculum. And once you specify that curriculum, then the second step is you have to teach that really well. Because teaching is not a random process. You see, teaching is purposeful, and teaching is intentional. And our purpose is to have all of our students to learn well. And what that means, if that's then our purpose in education and our purpose in grades, then what you want to do, if you do your job well, is shrink that variation. You want there to be very little variation in the grades. You really hope all the students earn high grades. And then you're able to defend and justify those grades based upon solid evidence of student learning derived from rigorous and really challenging learning goals. And also, if our purpose in grading is to represent whether students have learned well or not, that means you don't count class attendance. It doesn't describe how well they've learned. You don't count whether they turned in their assignments on time. It doesn't represent what they've learned. Not that those things are unimportant, it's just that it can't be part of the grade. And so you have to decide. From the very start, you have to decide your purpose. What does a grade represent? Is the grade going to represent whether they've learned, or is the grade represent compliance with your classroom rules? It can't be both. Because if you combine both into a single grade, it miscommunicates both. So we have to be clear about our purpose with grades. We have to be clear about what that grade represents. We need to be able to defend grades based on the evidence we've gathered from those measures of student learning. You see, grading is much more a challenge in effective communication than it is just documenting or quantifying student achievement. And so, what have I learned in this process? With grading, you always have to begin by defining your purpose. In your syllabus, instead of having 2 pages describing how you're going to calculate the grade, have 1 sentence that describes its purpose. If you do that, the rest will come easy. Thank you.